Ho ho ho! Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays everyone, and welcome back to Recap Stories. Today we're looking at the horror Christmas classic, Black Christmas. I hope you enjoy the video and spoilers ahead. It's the Christmas season. We see a sorority house all done up with lights while Silent Night plays. Jess, a local university student, arrives at her sorority house. Someone is outside, watching, creeping. We see them peer in the window while people are enjoying in the festivities. Barb, another student, asks who left the goddamn front door open. The figure backs away, finding a trellis, and begins to climb up. Barb asks Phil why she was the only one working today, and Phil tells her she was there this afternoon. The phone rings and Jess answers it. She tells Barb it's for her. Long distance. The figure quietly enters the attic of the sorority house. We see them slowly entering the house through the attic. Barb is on the phone with her mother and she's a bit drunk. The figure watches Barb as she's on the phone. Claire Harrison and her boyfriend Chris kiss and he tells her he'll see her next week. Barb is a little depressed. She asks the other girls if they'd like to go skiing. Jess and Phil both say yes. Claire, on the other hand, has plans with her boyfriend. The phone rings and Jess answers it. She says hello but no one says anything. Jess tells everyone to be quiet. It's him again, the moaner. The girls rally around to listen to the phone call. What they hear are bizarre screams, choking, laughing, and animal noises. Lots of bizarre and disturbing sounds. The voice says some very disgusting and vulgar things. Barb grabs the phone and calls him a creep. The voice says, "I'm going to kill you," and hangs up. The girls are really disturbed and don't think Barb should be antagonizing them. Barb says he's minor league and she gets calls like this all the time in the city. She insults Claire and Claire leaves to go pack. House mother Mrs. Mack is banging at the door. The girls take her to the other room as they have a surprise for her. Claire is in her room getting ready for her trip. We see a figure in her closet, watching her from behind a plastic clothes protector. Claire hears a noise from her closet and goes to check it out. The figure attacks, wrapping the plastic around her head. Mrs. Mack is holding up the nightgown the girls got her and her face says it all. She pretends to love it. The girls beg her to put it on. We see the shadow of the figure carrying Claire's body. They disappear up into the attic. Mrs. Mack says goodnight to the girls. She pulls a book out of a cabinet and grabs a bottle of booze hidden within. The phone rings and Jess and Phil look scared. Phil answers it and it's Jess's boyfriend Peter. He's a musician and had to miss the party because he's been practicing and hasn't slept in 3 days. Jess has something to tell him, but it has to be in person. He tells her he loves her and she says I know, and says she'll see him tomorrow. Mrs. Mack is brushing her teeth and she pulls another bottle of booze from the water tank of the toilet. Jess knocks on Claire's door but no one answers. Claire's in the attic, dead, positioned on a rocking chair with a bag over her head. Mr. Harrison, Claire's father, is at the university waiting for his daughter. He asks a student for help and he's given directions to Claire's sorority. Mr. Harrison is with Mrs. Mack, who tells him her bags are packed. Maybe she could be at the fraternity as they're throwing a Christmas event for underprivileged children. She says they could head there if he doesn't mind giving her a lift. Mrs. Mack is enjoying yet another bottle of booze while she's venting some frustrations over Claire's father. The two leave, not knowing the girl they're looking for is dead in the attic. At the university, and Jess tells Peter she's pregnant. He's so excited, but she tells him she doesn't want it. She wants to have it terminated. He says she can't make a decision like that. She never asked him. Peter is frustrated as he has an important audition tonight, and news like this will only distract him. He tells her he wants to talk tonight, and she tells him there's nothing to discuss. Peter will be over at the sorority at 9 o'clock. Mr. Harrison calls his wife, telling his wife what's going on, while Barb gives a little boy some champagne. The phone rings and Jess picks it up. It's the creeper again, speaking in multiple voices. It asks for Billy and where he's put baby Agnes. Jess abruptly hangs up. Mr. Harrison and a couple of the girls are reporting Claire's disappearance to Sergeant Nash. Nash tells him 90% of the time, missing girls are found up at the cottage with her boyfriend. Mr. Harrison doesn't see this as much of a consolation prize. Jess tells Mrs. Mack about the creepy call. Mrs. Mack tells her about Claire while fishing out another bottle of booze, only to find this one is empty. Jess arrives at Chris's hockey game. She asks him if he's seen Claire. He says she went home, but Jess tells him she didn't and no one can find her. Peter is playing at his audition and doing a rather poor job as his head is elsewhere. A woman is speaking with Lieutenant Ken Fuller, reporting her 13-year-old daughter has been missing all day. Chris comes barging in the door, giving Nash an earful. He asks Ken why nothing is being done about Claire. At the sorority and they're having dinner. Mr. Harrison doesn't have much of an appetite as he feels he should be doing more. Barb relays some unwelcome information on the love life of turtles, and Mr. Harrison doesn't look too impressed. She's a bit drunk. Barb tells them they believe it's all her fault, don't they? Phil tells her she's drunk and to go to bed. Peter is destroying his piano as he's just lost it. Jess arrives home with Chris and they meet Mr. Harrison. They're all going to head out and look for her. There's a search party gathered to find Claire and the young 13-year-old girl. They're to report directly to Ken if they find anything. The police and crowd split up and head out to search. A dark figure looms outside the sorority house. Mrs. Mack is in good spirits, packing to head to her sister's and enjoys yet another bottle of booze. She hears her cat meowing and heads out looking for him. A creak from the attic catches her attention. She cautiously approaches it. She heads up the ladder. We see the figure holding a large hook. Mrs. Mack calls for Claude, her cat, unable to see anything. To her horror, she finds Claire, dead, seated in the rocking chair. She hears a noise behind, turning to find the figure. It launches the hook at her, pulling her into the attic and killing her. The figure starts losing it, smashing everything in the attic and screaming. The search party is warming by a fire and Jess tells them she's heading home to wait and see if Claire returns. The body of Claire and now Mrs. Mack is seen through the window. A woman screams as she finds something. It's the body of the young 13-year-old girl. The phone is ringing and Jess arrives to pick it up. It's the figure on the other line making more disturbing noises. Jess asks what they want. She hangs up as she's terrified. She calls for Mrs. Mack, but there's no answer. We see the shadow of the figure as they're walking through the house. Jess is dialing the phone and a shadow is looming behind her. The figure gets closer. It's Peter, and he scared the hell out of her. He said he was sleeping upstairs and asked what all the yelling was about. Jess is on the phone with Nash reporting the bizarre calls. He blows her off as they're dealing with a murdered girl right now. Peter asks Jess what's wrong and she tells him the search party found a murdered little girl and Claire is still missing. He tells Jess they're getting married and she doesn't seem happy. She tells him she can't drop everything she's wanted to do because his plans have changed. She can't marry him. Peter is upset, then asks about the baby. Ken is giving Nash crap for not telling him about Claire's disappearance. He tells him the calls could be connected to the young girl's murder and to Claire's disappearance, so they're going to investigate the calls. Peter calls Jess a selfish bitch, saying she's acting like killing a baby is like having a wart removed. This is why she didn't want to tell him. He gets confrontational and threatening. Jess tells him to get out. Peter tells her she's going to be very sorry. He leaves in a fit of rage just as the others are coming in. Ken takes note of how he behaved. Jess meets with Ken and a man named Bill Grant. They want to put a tap on her line but need her permission. Jess tells Ken about the calls and the last time she saw Claire. Bill tells them when the phone rings, it will ring at the station house as well, and he'll be keeping an eye on it. They need to keep the caller on the line as long as possible. Bill asks if there's another phone. They say yes, Mrs. Mack has one, but it's another line, and they haven't received any of the calls on it. There's an officer outside keeping an eye on things, so they don't need to worry. Ken leaves, and we see Peter outside watching the house. Phil is upset because she believes Claire is dead. She just has a feeling. She heads up to bed as she's exhausted. The figure rocks the body of Claire back and forth. We see it leave the attic, opening the door to Barb's room. Jess hears a loud noise and rushes upstairs. Barb is having an asthma attack. She tells Jess she had a nightmare a stranger was coming in her room, which triggered the attack. Jess leaves her room as we see children at the front door singing Christmas carols. Jess heads outside to enjoy the singing. The figure returns, grabbing a glass unicorn. With the unicorn above its head, Barb awakes to see them standing there. She is repeatedly stabbed while the children sing. The phone rings and Jess picks it up. It's the figure again, making more strange noises, telling Billy to drop the knife. They hang up before Bill can find the connection. Ken calls her to inform her she needs to keep him on the line longer. The figure watches her from the stairs. Ken says he'll call back in a little while. Jess is with Phil and the figure is watching them from another room. Jess is concerned because the caller repeated everything Peter said to her that night. Phil thinks it might be a coincidence. Another call and it's Peter. He's upset and crying. Peter says they can't kill the baby. She tells him to stop. He quickly hangs up. Ken calls her again asking what Peter was talking about. She tells him she's pregnant and doesn't want to keep it. Ken is suspicious of Peter and thinks Jess is withholding information. He asks if Peter's ever been there when she got one of the calls, and she says he was there tonight when the first call came in. Ken tells her she's doing fine, and he'll call her later. The ladies are relieved that it's not Peter. Ken tells Nash he wants all files he can get on Peter, and to have a car meet him around front. Phil hears a noise coming from Barb's room. She heads in asking if she's awake. The door closes behind her, and we hear a loud noise. Jess is locking up for the night. She calls Phil, but there's no answer. The phone rings, and Jess answers it. The figure is on the line again, making absurd noises. Jess is horrified at what she's hearing. Bill is searching for the line. Ken is looking at Peter's piano all smashed up and is told the figure is on the line again. Bill finally gets it and rushes to call Ken. Jess is deeply disturbed at what she just heard. Ken gets a call from Nash telling him the phone company says the call is coming from 6 Belmont Street. Ken says, for Christ's sake, you've got it all wrong. That's where the calls are going into. Nash tells him that's where they're coming from, too. Ken realizes what's happening and looks horrified. He calls for the officer at the house and we see him dead with his throat cut. Ken tells Nash to call Jess, but don't tell her he's in the house. Just ask her to walk straight out. Jess yells for Phil with no answer. The phone rings and it's Nash. He tells her just put the phone down and leave the house. She asks what's wrong and says she'll get Phil and Barb. He yells saying don't do that. Nash tells her the calls are coming from inside the house. She puts the phone down and starts yelling for Phil and Barb. Jess grabs a fire poker and proceeds upstairs. Entering Barb's room, she finds their murdered bodies. She hears a voice saying, "Agnes, it's me, Billy," and sees an eye peering at her through the crack of the door. She pushes the door, runs off with the man screaming. He grabs her hair and she falls. She heads in the basement, locking the door behind her, while he screams and bangs on the door. We hear the front door open and close. The police are rushing towards her. Jess hears a voice outside the basement windows. A figure is at the window. It's Peter, and he's asking if Jess is alright. She's completely scared. Peter kicks the window in and enters. He's looking for Jess, calling her name. The police are at the house. Ken finds the murdered officer and hears Jess's screams. They bust in the basement, finding Jess with a dead Peter. Jess is in bed resting, and Ken, along with the other officers, say they knew it was Peter. The officers leave the room and turn the light off to let her rest. We hear sounds coming from the attic. The figure is up there with the bodies of Mrs. Mack and Claire. He says, "Agnes, it's me, Billy," and we slowly pull from the window. Nothing but the howling winter winds. An officer is seen outside. The phone rings, and the film ends. I hope you enjoyed today's frightfully festive video. Let me know in the comments what you thought of Black Christmas. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe and turn on the bell to be notified of any new uploads. Thank you for watching, and as always, do take care.